All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about finance careers. So, if you're watching this right now, maybe you're interested in entering a career in financial services, private equity, investment banking, financial advisor, or maybe you're already in the career and you're trying to get your footing. So, I'm going to share a bit about my story and each step along the way, the steps that I use to become a private market analyst and enter the field of finance. Let's begin from the start. So, if you don't know already, I am a prior service United States Marine. I served from 2009 until 2013, did 2 tours in Afghanistan, and I did not have a finance background whatsoever. When I got out of the service, I moved back in with my grandparents and started going to community college, originally for business. Never thought about doing finance as a career. I had never met a financial advisor. My family never had a financial advisor. But one thing in this stage is I was always interested in investing. I was always reading Bloomberg, always reading the Wall Street Journal, read a ton of different books. And I had this general curiosity and interest in being in financial services. Didn't really know how, but I knew I wanted to be in financial services. And one thing you'll learn about this field is there are so many different ways to get into the field. There's all these different areas of finance, and it can be very confusing and overwhelming to find your way. This is when the seed was first getting planted. I remember going overseas and deploying, and every single finance book I could get my hands on. As a matter of fact, the first book I read about investing was A Random Walk Down Wall Street. But I would read any type of book, any type of material I could get my hands on. And I was always obsessed with this idea that you had all these asset managers, Ray Dalio, Warren Buffett, Robert Smith. They made their investors extremely wealthy, but at the same time, they weren't an athlete, they weren't an entertainer. The average person would not know who these people were, but they were extremely powerful, extremely influential, and extremely wealthy. And I was obsessed with this idea. It just kind of consumed my thought process. During this period, I was reading a lot of books, still didn't have my eyes set on a finance career. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do because I had never met anybody that was a financial advisor or successful high finance individual. And also I had no idea how to enter the field. So along the path, I was investing my own money. I started off literally with $200. If you go on my Instagram page, there's actually an About Me section where it kind of walks you through the timeline. I still remember I invested that first $200 in VOO ETF that I still own to this day after reading A Random Walk Down Wall Street. So I started with $200. I'm investing my money and it starts building up after a while. And I start putting more capital into learning how to invest. And along the way, I joined an online chat, and it was an online investor group dedicated to getting people together, learning about investing, learning about markets and that sort of thing. Being in finance, we have this amazing community of individuals that love investing, individuals that love economics, markets. And when you surround yourself around those individuals, you would be surprised at how much you learn, how much you pick up, and who you're going to be around. So surrounding myself with those individuals was so influential in my development and getting into private markets. So through that process, I met my mentor, and by chance, me and this individual ended up becoming good friends. And he taught me a lot about the markets. And this individual, he was a prior trader. He worked at a hedge fund as a trader overseas. He had left his hedge fund job to manage his own accounts, and he was done with that life, and he was trying to figure out himself. For 3 years, myself and a group of others, we would get on Zoom every single day and study markets, invest in markets, study economics. And I did this for 3 years. And this 3-year period set me up for success. The next thing I'll highlight is before someone is ever going to pay you for anything, you have to be willing to do it for free. Finance is such a competitive field. You're dealing with some of the smartest, brightest mathematicians. When you're going into the financial services field, you really have to be on your A game, and you have to be willing to nurture and develop those skills that are necessary. And a lot of these skills take a long time to build up. During this warm up stage, I was studying under my mentor, waking up every single day, doing it for free, investing my own capital. I want to start anything I could get my hands on, any type of paper work, any type of bank reports I could read from my mentor. He would give them to me and I would consume it. I was just gathering knowledge during this period. But at this time, I still never really considered being in finance as a career because it seemed like such a far off reality, especially an individual coming where I come from. I came from a family that we never had a financial advisor. I never met a financial advisor. I didn't even know how to analyze investments. The idea of working every single day and the only thing you do is analyze investments was just such a foreign concept to me. So at this point, I was focused. I said, you know what? I believe that I can grow my account to a point and I can get good enough at investing and I can do this as a full-time job and support myself with just my portfolio. A little bit of naive thinking in my 20s, but you have to believe in yourself. And so in 2020, after my father had passed away, I made a decision. I said, you know what? Life is short. I'm going for it all. I ended up cashing out my 401k and using that money that was in my 401k and investing it on my own. I wanted more flexibility over the money. In the 401k, you only have certain options, and a lot of those options are broad-based market investing. Nothing wrong with that. That's what 401ks are designed for. But I had all this money in this 401k and I said, you know, I want the full flexibility of it. And the only way I'm going to grow and prove to myself if I can be an investment manager, and I said, I need to multiply this money. Not suggesting somebody else do that, but that's what I did. And I had to go for it all. And I miserably failed. The funny part is I failed during a huge recovery in the 2020 bull market. So if anybody has ever managed their own account, whether long-term, short-term, you realize how challenging it is. But this portion of my development was probably the most influential and critical because it built the skills within myself, the mental skills that I needed to be able to do this at a professional level. I still remember one of my first investments that went south. It was Tesla short, I believe. The trade moved against me. At the time, I had no risk management skills, no stop loss. In 2020, Tesla is just roaring, it's just pumping. Why I was short, no idea. But I'm short Tesla. And I remember sitting in my living room and I'm just kind of staring at the ceiling. I'm looking at my account and it's just steadily losing money and it's losing money, it's losing money. And this was my 401k money that I had cashed out, all the money that I had worked for. And I'm sitting there staring at the ceiling and I said, like, what am I doing? I'm done. I'm cooked. That was my biggest loss at the time. And it was my first real big punch to the gut. But, you know, you wake up, wipe the tears out of your eyes. And I was like, okay, I got to get back to it. And I kept on and I kept on and I kept on. And after a while, I did find success and I ended up 5Xing that original 401k amount. I was reading 10Ks from earnings reports. I was reading 10Qs. I was looking at financial statements, you know, anything I can get my hands on. So in 2022, I did my final contractor deployment and I went to Iraq. I was deployed in Erbil, Iraq, super hot, middle of the summer, 120 degrees. So I got to the point where I said, you know, it's now or never. I can't take the stress anymore. I need to enter this as a professional career. So like many of us have done, I went through the whole process, brushing my resume up, and I began to send my resume out to all these shops. I put in the application and 10 minutes later, it'd say I was denied. And I was like, okay, there's no way anybody looked at my application. Be aware of scam internships. I'll get into how I got scammed in an internship. I'm applying for jobs. I'm receiving no for everything. I come across a job application that says, if you've done this internship program, you're eligible for this job. I don't even know if they're still in business. As a word to the wise, if you ever have to pay for any type of internship program that's going to say, we're going to get you job placement, completely ignore it. So I go through this program and the program says, if you finish in the top quartile percent of the program after you pay for it, we're going to get you an internship at a top leading firm I'm like, this is my opportunity. This is my chance to break through. I just got to kill it. So for 3 months, I paid for this internship. The internship program was like $1,000 to try out for the internship. And I get all the way to the end and they tell me, you've been selected. You're either going to do a remote internship or you're going to go to New York City. I was so excited. I called my mother, shed some tears. I'm thinking about my dad who had passed away. I said, man, I worked so hard for this. Come to find out, there was no internship. It was a scam. They took people's money that wanted to work in finance and they scammed them. So for those of you that are looking for opportunities right now, maybe some of you have been through this. If you've been through this, definitely tell your story in the comments. I was like, okay, I'm back to square one. What do I do? And I was defeated. I quit my job. I worked so hard these last 3 months to try to get this internship, and now it's a scam. Where do I go from here? So I was at this crossroad, this fork again. And I said, if I did this once, I can do it again. I can find another opportunity. At the time, I had no idea that a private market analyst actually existed. I didn't even know anything about private markets, to be quite frank. And at the time, I started feeling down. I started feeling like depressed. I had taken over a 50% pay cut, leaving government contracting, flying drones to follow this dream in finance. I was really down on myself, really depressed, didn't really know what to do. One night, I'm like, okay, this isn't where my story ends. I want to help people. I want to do real good in the world with investments. And I still do have this dream of reaching the status of being an investment manager. I began searching the internet. And as I was searching, I was not actually looking for a job. I was saying, hey, what do I need to do to make myself more competitive? Do I need to get an MBA? Do I need to get a CFA? And in that moment, Finance with Santiago was birthed. I said, I'm never going to get an opportunity just based on my resume. What I can get an opportunity of is if people see how I think, how I approach investing, and we go from there. In 2023, I said, I'm going to make an online blog newsletter in written form, and I'm going to use that every time I apply for a job. I'm going to forward them to my website, and they can read how I approach investing. They can read all this great information that I've learned over the last 5 years or so. And so I started the website, and trust me, the original versions of the website, you can actually still go back and see my first ever post in 2023. It came a long way, and I began posting on there. And through that process, I came across an opportunity to be a private market investment analyst. And during that opportunity, I, read the description, saw everything. I began to look up private markets, private investments, and it just clicked. I said, this is exactly what I need to be doing. And I put my focus on that. And so I would encourage anybody, if you are stuck in a position, you enter the career in finance and you really don't like it, or you're not sure, or maybe you're trying to get to the position and you want to work at a private equity firm or an investment bank, don't give up. Creating a blog is one of the easiest, cheapest forms to get your thoughts out there and to become more visible so that others can see your thoughts and see how you invest, because a resume only can say but so much. And the biggest thing in finance is that nobody wants to put you in front of a client if you don't have good presentation skills, but also nobody wants to put you in front of a client if you haven't done anything or invested any capital. Go after what you really want. A lot of times we sell ourselves short and we receive a couple of no's or you receive a couple of setbacks. Go after what you want, because in the end, whether you fail or succeed, you're going to be much happier versus selling yourself short. So I went after it and ended up working in private markets, analyzing private investments. Funny story about going through the interview process. We had to evaluate an oil and gas deal. If anybody's ever looked at an oil and gas deal, you know that you receive these thick documents that are like hundreds of pages long of legal jargon and investment jargon. And at this time, ChatGPT was fresh. It was like brand new. It just came out. And I was one of the early adopters to ChatGPT. I discovered it early on and I was instantly hooked on its capabilities. I'm going through this process and they're like, hey, for the case study, we want you to evaluate this oil and gas deal and create an investment memo or an investment analysis. And there was no parameters that they gave you. They just said, do this investment analysis. And I'm looking at this oil and gas investment. I'm like, holy crap. This is where using AI is so powerful. We live in such a powerful age now that we can use AI to our benefit. So what I ended up doing is I went through the document, any legal term, anything I did not understand, I would ask ChatGPT what it is. And what you'll end up figuring out when you work with private investments is that any investment, it can be the most obscure. You're investing in marijuana bubble gum, right? Every investment is a business and every investment is the present value of all future cash flows. If you can understand the business and you can understand how they generate revenue, then you can understand how investors make returns. So I'm looking at this investment and I've never seen an oil rig. I have no idea about the oil and gas business. All the work that I had done over all those years, waking up, talking to the traders, reading the 10Qs, reading the 10Ks was preparing me for this one moment. If you're right now, if you're looking to enter the career finance, or maybe you're stuck or you're at one place, but you'd rather be at another, just keep making plays, keep studying, keep learning the markets, keep learning how to analyze businesses, because when the opportunity does come your way, you definitely want to be prepared. I would sit down and straight up read 10Ks from the top. I would sit down and I really would want to understand, how are these businesses run? How are these businesses evaluated? How do I interpret the balance sheet? How do I interpret these financial statements? And this was before AI, right? Like I was sitting down reading 200 pages of these PDFs, but that helped me in the long run. Don't focus on the results, focus on the action. We can't control the results, but we can control our action. That's one thing my mentor always emphasized when we were trading. He said, there are a million possibilities that can come with any investment. All we can focus on is our process and putting the probabilities on our side. And how we put the probabilities on our side is we can control all the factors that are in our control. That opened up the door for me in private markets, transitioning from the military to private markets. It was a 10-year journey. And now I get to evaluate all kind of cool investments, from pro sports to private equity investments, oil and gas. The list is endless. I've looked at music rights, really exciting investments, and it opened up a whole new world of investments. If you are interested in a career in finance, make sure that you check out my video, The Best Finance Careers That Will Survive AI, that will break down the top 5 careers in the AI age.